The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the dusty trading post, and Katherine Kane tumbled out onto the scorched Nevada ground with her broken ankle screaming in protest, wondering if this godforsaken place called Sloan would be where she finally died. July 1873 had brought merciless heat to the high desert, and Katherine had been running for 3 weeks straight. Running from St. Louis, from the whispers, from the pitying glances of her former employer's family, who had made it abundantly clear that a crippled housemaid with a limp and mounting medical debts was more trouble than she was worth. The accident in their home had left her ankle shattered, and though the doctor had said it, the bones had healed wrong. Now every step sent lightning bolts of pain up her leg, and she could barely walk without assistance. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Peters, helped her up with obvious reluctance. She could see it in his eyes, that same look she had grown to recognize. Burden. The word hung in the air between them like the desert heat shimmering off the packed earth. "This is as far as I go, miss," Peters said, depositing her single carpetbag beside her. "You sure you want to stay here? This ain't much of a town." Katherine looked around at what passed for Sloan, Nevada. A handful of weathered buildings clustered around a well, a general store with a sagging porch, a saloon that had seen better days, and beyond that, the vast emptiness of sage-covered desert stretching toward distant mountains. The railroad was being built somewhere north of here, and Sloan existed primarily as a supply stop for prospectors and trappers heading into the higher elevations. "I have family here," Katherine lied, because the truth was too pathetic to speak aloud. She had nowhere else to go, and exactly $17 to her name. Peters tipped his hat and climbed back onto the coach. Within minutes, she was alone in the street, the dust from the departing stagecoach settling over her dark traveling dress like a shroud. Katherine picked up her bag and took a tentative step toward the general store. Her ankle gave way immediately, and she stumbled, barely catching herself on a hitching post. Pain exploded through her leg, so intense it stole her breath. She stood there, trembling, trying not to cry. Behind her, she heard voices from the saloon porch. "Another one looking for gold that does not exist," a man said with a harsh laugh. "Look at her limping." "What's a cripple doing out here?" another voice added. "Probably running from something." "They always are." Katherine felt her face burn with humiliation. She forced herself to take another step, then another, dragging her bad leg behind her. Each movement was agony, but she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. She had endured worse than cruel words. She had endured being told by Mrs. Hartford, her former employer, that she was a burden the family could no longer afford to carry, that her presence made everyone uncomfortable, that it would be better for everyone if she simply left. The general store was blessedly cool inside, dim after the harsh sunlight. An older woman behind the counter looked up from her ledger, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as Katherine limped inside. "Lord have mercy, child. You look like you are about to collapse," the woman said, coming around the counter. "Sit down before you fall down." She guided Katherine to a wooden chair near the pot-bellied stove, and Katherine sank into it gratefully. The woman studied her with sharp but not unkind eyes. "I am Martha Donovan. My husband and I run this store. What brings you to Sloan?" Katherine tried to formulate an answer that would not reveal her desperation. "I am looking for work. I thought perhaps with the prospectors coming through, someone might need help." Martha's expression told Katherine everything she needed to know. This was not a place that needed crippled housemaids. This was not a place that needed much of anything except grit and the ability to survive. "What happened to your leg?" Martha asked gently. "I fell down the stairs at my employer's home in St. Louis. The doctor said the bones healed poorly. It is getting worse, not better." Katherine swallowed hard. "They let me go because I could not keep up with my duties anymore." Martha was quiet for a moment, then patted Katherine's shoulder. "You stay here and rest. I will bring you some water. Then we will figure out what to do with you." As Martha disappeared into the back room, Katherine closed her eyes and tried not to think about the fact that she had reached the end of her rope. She had no family, no prospects, and not enough money to go anywhere else, even if there were somewhere to go. She was 22 years old and completely alone in the world. The door opened, letting in a blast of hot air and bright sunlight. Katherine opened her eyes and found herself staring at the largest man she had ever seen. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. His hair was dark brown, long enough to brush his collar, and his face was deeply tanned and weathered by sun and wind. He wore buckskins and heavy boots, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in his own skin. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even beneath his shirt, and his hands looked like they could snap a tree branch without effort. He glanced at Katherine briefly, his eyes a startling shade of blue-gray, then moved to the counter with surprising grace for such a large man. "Martha," he called out, his voice a deep rumble. "You have those supplies ready?" Martha emerged from the back, carrying a tin cup of water for Katherine. "Warren." "Yes, I have got everything on your list. Give me a minute to get it together." "Warren." Katherine studied him from beneath her lashes as Martha set the water in her hands. He was looking at the shelves, his expression unreadable, but she had the distinct impression he was aware of every detail in the room, including her presence. "Who is the girl?" he asked quietly. "Came in on the stage, looking for work." Martha lowered her voice, but not enough that Katherine could not hear. "She is hurt, Warren. Bad leg. I do not know what we are going to do with her." Katherine felt her cheeks burn with shame. There it was again, the fundamental problem of her existence. What to do with her? How to dispose of the burden? Warren turned and looked at her directly for the first time. His gaze was not cruel, but it was assessing, taking in every detail. Katherine lifted her chin, refusing to look away. She had nothing left but her pride, and she would not surrender that too. "Can you cook?" he asked abruptly. Katherine blinked. "Yes, I was a housemaid for 8 years. I can cook, clean, sew, and keep accounts." "Can you do it with a bad leg?" The question was blunt, but not unkind. Katherine appreciated the directness. "I can do anything if I can sit down while doing it. The cooking and sewing, yes. The cleaning would be harder, but I could manage." Warren was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Then he turned back to Martha. "Add extra flour, salt, and coffee beans to my order, and whatever she needs." He gestured at Katherine. Martha's eyebrows shot up. "Warren, what are you thinking?" "I am thinking that I am tired of eating my own cooking, and my cabin could use a woman's touch. If she is willing to earn her keep, she can come up the mountain with me." Katherine's heart began to pound. She looked between Warren and Martha, trying to understand what was happening. "I do not understand. You are offering me work? Room and board in exchange for cooking and keeping the place livable. I am up at my trapping cabin until the snow comes. It is isolated, but there is plenty of food and a good roof. Better than what you will find here in Sloan." He looked at her steadily. "But I will not lie to you. It is hard country, and the cabin is a 2-day ride from here. You would be alone with me until I bring the furs down in October." Martha made a small sound of protest. "Warren, you cannot just take a young woman up to your cabin. People will talk." "Let them talk," Warren said flatly. "She needs work, I need help. That is all there is to it." Katherine's mind raced. Every sensible instinct told her this was dangerous. Going into the mountains alone with a strange man was the height of foolishness. He could be anyone, could do anything to her, and no one would know or care. But the alternative was staying in Sloan with no money, no prospects, and nowhere to sleep. She could see the calculation in Martha's eyes as well, the knowledge that there were no good options here. "I will need to know more about you," Katherine said carefully, "before I agree to anything." Warren nodded as if he had expected this. "Fair enough. My name is Warren McAllister. I trap and hunt in the mountains east of here, mostly alone. I have a cabin at 8,000 feet that has been in my family for 15 years. Martha and her husband have known me for 10 years and can vouch that I am not a murderer or worse." "He is telling the truth," Martha confirmed. "Warren is a good man, Katherine. Keeps to himself mostly, but he is honest and decent. I have never heard a bad word about him, and that is saying something out here." Katherine looked down at her hands, at the water cup she was gripping so tightly her knuckles had gone white. This was insane, this was desperate, this was also possibly the only chance she was going to get. "What if I cannot do the work?" she asked quietly. "What if my leg is too bad and I am useless to you?" Warren moved closer, and she realized just how massive he truly was. He could break her in half without effort. But when he spoke, his voice was gentler than she expected. "You said you can cook and sew sitting down. That is enough. I am not looking for a servant, just someone to share the work. If your leg troubles you, you rest. Simple as that. People will think I am your woman, Katherine said, meeting his eyes. They will say I am a whore earning her keep on her back. She saw something flicker in his expression, a flash of anger that was not directed at her. People say a lot of things, does not make them true. You will have your own space in the cabin. I will not touch you or force you into anything you do not want. You have my word on that. His word. Katherine had learned the hard way that most people's words were worthless, but she was also out of choices, out of time, and out of hope. All right, she said, I will go with you. Martha looked relieved and worried at the same time. Let me pack you some proper supplies, Warren. You make sure she has what she needs. For the next hour, Katherine sat in the chair and watched as Warren and Martha assembled supplies. Extra blankets, sturdy dresses that would hold up to mountain life, boots that looked like they might actually fit her, dried goods, and countless other items she could not afford. When she tried to protest, Warren cut her off. Consider it an advance on your wages. You can pay me back in meals. By the time they were ready to leave, the sun was lowering toward the western horizon. Warren had loaded everything onto a pack mule, along with the supplies he had originally come for. His own horse was a massive bay gelding that looked like it could carry Warren's considerable weight without effort. The problem was getting Katherine onto a horse at all. She stood beside the smaller mare Warren had apparently acquired from somewhere, staring at the stirrup that might as well have been a mile high. Her ankle was throbbing from the brief walk from the store, and she knew that trying to mount would be excruciating. I do not think I can do this, she admitted, hating the weakness in her voice. Warren studied the situation for a moment, then simply stepped forward and scooped her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Katherine gasped, grabbing instinctively at his shoulders. Solid muscle, warm and real beneath her hands. He lifted her onto the mare's back as easily as if she were a child, settling her into the saddle with surprising gentleness. How is that? He asked, adjusting the stirrups. Katherine was breathing hard, not from pain, but from the shock of being lifted so effortlessly. She had expected him to be annoyed by her weakness, to make some comment about the difficulty of dealing with a cripple. Instead, he had simply solved the problem and moved on. That is fine, she managed. Thank you. He nodded and swung up onto his own horse with fluid ease. As they prepared to leave, Martha came out of the store one more time. You take care of yourself, Katherine Kane. And Warren, you bring her back down before the first snow so people can see she is all right. Will do, Warren said. He looked at Katherine. You ready? No, she thought. She was not ready. She was terrified and in pain and committing herself to an insane course of action that might get her killed or worse. But she was also done being a burden, done being the broken thing that people tried to fix or discard. If she was going to fail, at least it would be on her own terms. I am ready, she said. They rode out of Sloan as the sun painted the desert gold and crimson, heading toward the distant mountains that rose like a promise against the darkening sky. The first day of riding was worse than Katherine could have imagined. Every jolt and movement of the horse sent pain radiating up from her ankle, and by midday she was gritting her teeth so hard her jaw ached. Warren maintained a steady pace, not fast but not slow either, and he seemed perfectly content to ride in silence. They stopped around noon in the shade of a rock outcropping. Warren helped her down from the horse, and this time Katherine could not completely hide the cry of pain when her foot touched the ground. Her ankle buckled, and Warren caught her before she fell. How bad? He asked, steadying her. It will be fine, Katherine said through gritted teeth. Just need a moment. Warren made a sound that might have been disagreement, but he helped her to a smooth boulder where she could sit. He moved away to tend the horses, and Katherine took the opportunity to unlace her boot. The ankle was swollen, hot to the touch, and angry red. She closed her eyes and breathed through the pain. Let me see. She opened her eyes to find Warren crouching in front of her, a canteen in one hand. She hesitated, then extended her foot. His hands were huge, calloused, but surprisingly gentle as he examined the ankle. This was not set right, he said after a moment. Bones are crooked, should have been rebroken and set properly. The doctor said it was too late for that, said I would just have to live with it. Warren made a disgusted sound. City doctors, more concerned with their fees than fixing people. He pulled a strip of cloth from his pack and soaked it with water from the canteen. This will help with the swelling. We will wrap it tonight when we camp. You should have said something earlier. I did not want to slow you down. He looked up at her, those blue-gray eyes steady and unreadable. You are not slowing me down, but if you hurt yourself worse trying to prove something, that will slow us both down. Understand? Katherine nodded, feeling chastened. He wrapped the cool cloth around her ankle, and the relief was immediate. Then he handed her dried meat and hardtack for lunch. They ate in companionable silence. Katherine watched him covertly, trying to understand this strange man who had taken her on without question. He moved with the economy of someone who wasted no energy, every gesture purposeful. His face was hard to read, weathered and impassive, but she did not sense cruelty in him, just a kind of remote self-sufficiency, as if he had spent so long alone that other people had become optional. Why did you offer to help me? She asked finally. Warren chewed thoughtfully before answering. Because you needed help and I needed a cook. Seemed practical. You do not know anything about me. I could be a thief or worse. Could be, he agreed. But you are not. I can tell. How? He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the desert. You have the eyes of someone who has been kicked too many times but keeps getting up anyway. I respect that. Something in Katherine's chest tightened. She had not expected understanding from this mountain man, had not expected him to see her so clearly. I'm afraid, she admitted quietly, afraid that I will be a burden to you too, that my leg will be too much trouble and you will regret bringing me. Warren finished his food and stood, brushing crumbs from his buckskins. When he looked down at her, his expression had softened slightly. I have carried elk carcasses that weighed more than 3 men combined down from the high peaks. I have hauled beaver traps through frozen streams and dragged dead weight through snowdrifts taller than I am. Whatever you think you are, whatever burden you think you represent, it is nothing compared to what this land demands every day. He extended his hand to help her up. You worry too much about being trouble. Just focus on healing and learning the mountains. Katherine took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. His grip was strong, solid, and for the first time in months she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who would not give up on her at the first sign of difficulty. They rode on through the afternoon, climbing gradually as the desert gave way to scattered juniper and pinyon pine. The air grew cooler, fresher, and Katherine found herself breathing easier despite the pain. Warren pointed out landmarks, teaching her the shapes of the mountains so she could find her way if needed. By evening, they had climbed high enough that actual ponderosa pines surrounded them, and there was even a thin trickle of a stream running through the rocky soil. Warren made camp with practiced efficiency, setting up a small tent for Katherine and laying out his own bedroll by the fire. You sleep in the tent, he said. I am used to sleeping rough. Katherine wanted to protest that she did not need special treatment, but her body was screaming for rest. She crawled into the tent and collapsed onto the blankets Warren had arranged. Her ankle was on fire, her back ached, and exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide. She must have dozed off because when she opened her eyes again, it was full dark and she could smell something cooking. She limped out of the tent to find Warren tending a pot over the fire. Thought you might be hungry, he said, not looking up. Just rabbit stew, nothing fancy. Katherine lowered herself to a log near the fire. I thought I was supposed to be cooking for you. You can start when we reach the cabin. Tonight you rest. They ate in comfortable silence, and Katherine had to admit the stew was better than she expected, plain but well seasoned, filling and hot. As she ate, she found herself studying Warren in the firelight. He was perhaps 30, maybe a year or two older, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his current expression indicated. There was a scar on his left forearm, pale against his tan skin, and his hands bore countless smaller scars from years of hard work. Do you ever get lonely? She asked impulsively. Up in the mountains by yourself? Warren considered the question. Sometimes. But there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. I have learned to appreciate the quiet. I was lonely in St. Louis, Katherine said softly, surrounded by people but completely alone. He looked at her then, really looked at her. That is the worst kind. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that needed no words. They were both solitary creatures, both damaged in their own ways, both trying to survive in a harsh world that had little patience for weakness. After dinner, Warren examined her ankle again. The swelling had gone down slightly, and he wrapped it carefully with strips of cloth, creating a makeshift support that helped stabilize the joint. "This will make tomorrow easier," he said. "But you tell me if it gets worse, no suffering in silence." "Yes, sir," Katherine said with a faint smile. "And do not call me sir. I work for a living." That startled a laugh out of her, and she saw the corner of his mouth twitch in response. Maybe, she thought as she crawled back into the tent that night, this would not be so terrible after all. The second day was both better and worse. Better because the wrapping helped her ankle, worse because her entire body ached from the unaccustomed riding. But Warren was patient, stopping frequently to let her rest, never complaining about the slower pace. By late afternoon, they reached the cabin. It sat in a small meadow at the edge of a pine forest, with mountains rising dramatically on three sides. The cabin itself was larger than Katherine had expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. There was a small barn for the horses, a smokehouse, and what looked like a workshop of some kind. "Home," Warren said simply, dismounting. He helped Katherine down, and she stood looking around in wonder. It was beautiful here in a wild and untamed way. The air smelled of pine and cold stone, and she could hear water running somewhere nearby. Birds called from the trees, and the wind whispered through the branches like a song. "It is lovely," she breathed. Warren looked pleased. "Come on, let me show you inside." The cabin was as well maintained as the exterior suggested. One large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a proper iron stove, a table and chairs, shelves stocked with supplies. There were 2 doors leading to separate sleeping areas, and the whole place was remarkably clean for a bachelor's residence. "You take the back room," Warren said, gesturing to one of the doors. "It has a proper bed and a window. I will take the front." Katherine peeked into the back room and found a simple but comfortable space with a real bed, a washstand, and even a small dresser. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, it looked like paradise. "This is more than I expected," she said honestly. "Thank you." Warren was already unloading supplies. "You can thank me by making something decent for supper. I am heartily sick of my own cooking." That night, despite her exhaustion, Katherine cooked her first meal in her new home. She made biscuits from scratch, fried salt pork, and heated canned beans seasoned with a bit of molasses she found in the stores. It was simple fare, but she put care into it, wanting to prove she was worth the gamble Warren had taken on her. When she set the plate in front of him, Warren stared at it for a long moment. Then he took a bite of the biscuit, and Katherine could have sworn she saw his eyes actually close in pleasure. "Dear God," he muttered, "I forgot what real food tastes like." Relief flooded through Katherine. "It is just biscuits. It is the best thing I have eaten in 6 months." He looked at her seriously. "You can stay as long as you want." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had wanted her to stay, since anyone had looked at her as anything other than a problem to be solved. "Thank you," she whispered. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Katherine woke early and made breakfast while Warren tended the animals and checked his trap lines. She cooked, cleaned what she could, and slowly began to learn the rhythms of mountain life. Warren was patient with her limitations, never pushing her to do more than her ankle would allow, but also never treating her as if she were made of glass. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. Warren taught her about the wildlife, the weather patterns, how to read the signs that meant a storm was coming. Katherine found herself talking to him in ways she had never talked to anyone, sharing stories from her childhood, her years in service, her fears and dreams. Warren was a good listener, thoughtful and genuine in his responses. He told her about growing up in these mountains, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17 and choosing to stay in the wilderness rather than return to civilization, about the peace he found in solitude and the satisfaction of living by his own hands. One evening, about 3 weeks after Katherine had arrived, she was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table when Warren came in from checking the trap lines. He was limping slightly, favoring his left leg. "What happened?" Katherine asked immediately. "Nothing, Just turned my ankle on some loose rocks. He waved off her concern. It is fine. But Katherine could see it was not fine. By the time supper was ready, Warren was moving stiffly, and his face was tight with pain. After they ate, Katherine made him sit down so she could look at his ankle. It was badly swollen, though not as severe as her chronic condition. She fetched cold water from the stream and wrapped his ankle the way he had wrapped hers, then made him prop it up on a stool. "You do not have to fuss," Warren protested. "You fussed over me," Katherine pointed out. "Fair is fair." He subsided, watching her move around the cabin preparing willow bark tea for the pain. When she brought him the cup, he took it with a rueful expression. "I am not used to being taken care of." "Neither was I," Katherine said softly. "But I am learning it is not so terrible." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Katherine became aware of how close she was standing, of the warmth radiating from Warren's large frame, of the way he was looking at her as if truly seeing her for the first time. She stepped back quickly, her heart hammering. This was not part of their arrangement. This was dangerous territory. "I should clean up," she said, turning away. Warren did not stop her, but she could feel his gaze on her back as she worked. That night, Katherine lay in her bed and tried to make sense of what she was feeling. She had not come here looking for romance. She had come here because she was desperate and had no other options. Warren had been kind to her, yes, but kindness was not love. Kindness was not a foundation for anything beyond gratitude. And yet, she could not stop thinking about the way his hands had felt on her ankle, gentle despite their size. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, with something that might have been wonder. The way her heart had started beating faster whenever he came into the room. No, Katherine told herself firmly. She would not let herself fall for Warren McAllister. That way lay only heartbreak and complications they did not need. But her heart, it seemed, had other ideas. August brought wildflowers to the meadow and a settling warmth to the high country. Warren's ankle healed quickly, and he went back to his trap lines and hunting while Katherine managed the cabin. Her own ankle was improving too, slowly but noticeably. The daily movement, combined with the clean air and good food, seemed to be helping what years of city living had only made worse. One morning, Katherine woke to find Warren already gone and a note on the kitchen table. Gone to check the high country lines, back by evening. There was venison in the cold box if you wanted to make stew. Katherine set about her day, feeling strangely bereft without Warren's presence. She had grown accustomed to their morning conversations over coffee, the way he always asked if she needed anything before he left, the comfortable silence they shared over meals. She realized with a sinking feeling, falling in love with him. The revelation should have terrified her, but instead it felt almost inevitable. How could she not fall for a man who treated her broken ankle as a mere inconvenience rather than a defining characteristic? Who looked at her as if she were capable and valuable rather than a burden to be endured? Who carried her over rough terrain when necessary but never made her feel weak for needing help? But Katherine also knew that love was a luxury she could not afford. Warren had offered her work and safety, not romance. He had been clear about the terms of their arrangement. She was the help, nothing more. To confuse his kindness for something deeper would be foolish and potentially disastrous. So she buried the feelings deep and tried to focus on her work. Warren returned that evening with a string of rabbits and news that he had seen bear sign in the upper meadows. They ate dinner on the porch, watching swallows swoop and dive in the fading light, and Katherine tried to ignore the ache in her chest every time their hands accidentally touched. It was Warren who broke the comfortable silence. "You have been different today," he observed. "Quieter than usual. Something bothering you." Katherine considered lying but found she could not. She and Warren had built something honest between them, and she would not tarnish it with dishonesty. "I was thinking about what will happen in October," she said carefully. "When you bring the furs down, I suppose I will need to find somewhere else to go." Warren set down his coffee cup and turned to look at her fully. "Why would you need to go somewhere else?" "Because that was the arrangement. Room and board until October, when you go back to civilization. The arrangement was that you would cook and keep the cabin. I never said anything about you leaving." His voice was gentle but firm. "Unless you want to leave, in that case I will take you wherever you want to go." I do not want to leave, Katherine admitted. But I do not want to be a burden either. You helped me when I needed it, and I am grateful. But I cannot impose on your charity forever. Warren was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and intense. Do you know how much weight I can carry? How much dead weight I can haul up a mountain or through a snowdrift? I have carried full-grown elk, 500 pounds or more, for miles. I have dragged sleds loaded with supplies through chest-deep snow. I am strong, Katherine. The mountains made me that way because you have to be strong to survive here. I know you are strong, Katherine said, confused by the direction of this conversation. Then hear me when I tell you this. Warren turned to face her fully, his blue-gray eyes intense in the fading light. You are not a burden. You have never been a burden. You are the lightest thing I have ever carried. Katherine felt her breath catch. Warren, I mean it. Whatever those people in St. Louis told you, whatever voices are in your head telling you that you are too much trouble, they are wrong. You are not weak because your ankle was broken. You are not less valuable because you cannot run. You are brave and capable, and the best thing that has happened to me in years. Tears were streaming down Katherine's face now, and she could not have stopped them if she tried. How can you say that? You barely know me. I know enough. Warren reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. I know that you get up every morning despite the pain and make this cabin a home. I know that you have never once complained about your situation even though you have every right to. I know that you listen when I talk about the mountains as if what I am saying matters. I know that you make the best biscuits I have ever tasted and that you sing while you work when you think I cannot hear you. Katherine let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You can hear me singing? You have a beautiful voice. His hand was still on her cheek, warm and solid. I should have said something sooner, but I did not want to presume. You came here looking for safety, not romance. But I cannot keep pretending that I do not feel what I feel. What do you feel? Katherine whispered, afraid to hope. Warren's expression softened in a way she had never seen before. I am falling in love with you, Katherine Kane. Have been since the day you lifted your chin in that general store and refused to be ashamed of yourself. You are fierce and strong and everything I did not know I was looking for. I am scared, Katherine admitted. Scared that this is too good to be true. Scared that I will wake up and find out I have been fooling myself. Then let me prove it to you. Warren leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop him. Let me show you that you are wanted, not despite your limitations but including them. All of you, Katherine. That is what I want. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and questioning, a kiss that asked permission even as it gave everything. Katherine melted into it, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, anchoring herself to this solid, real man who saw her as something precious. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Warren rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said simply, not as the help, as my partner, as my woman, if you will have me. Katherine thought about all the times she had been told she was too much trouble, too broken to be worth the effort. She thought about the whispers in St. Louis, the pitying looks, the suggestions that she should lower her expectations because no man would want a crippled wife. And then she looked at Warren McAllister, this mountain of a man who had carried her literally and figuratively without complaint, who looked at her as if she were the sunrise after a long night. Yes, she said, yes, I will stay. Yes, I am yours. Warren kissed her again, deeper this time, and Katherine felt something inside her that had been broken for so long finally begin to heal. The next weeks were a revelation. Warren courted her with the same quiet intensity he brought to everything else, bringing her wildflowers from the high meadows, teaching her to fish in the cold streams, holding her hand as they walked through the forest at sunset. He was patient with her ankle, never pushing her beyond her limits, but also encouraging her to test those limits and discover she was stronger than she believed. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Warren told her about his childhood, about the parents he had lost, about the choice to stay in the mountains when everyone expected him to leave. Katherine told him about growing up in an orphanage, about the loneliness of being in service, about the accident that had changed everything. I was carrying a tea tray up the stairs, she said one evening as they sat by the fire. Mrs. Hartford's daughter startled me, and I fell backward. The doctor said it was a complex fracture, that it would take time to heal properly. But the Hartfords did not want to deal with a servant who could not work. They paid the doctor and then told me I should find somewhere else to be. Warren's jaw tightened. They threw you out while you were still injured. They gave me 2 weeks' wages and a letter of reference that damned me with faint praise. Katherine stared into the flames. I tried to find other work, but no one wanted a housemaid who limped. The other servants whispered about me being a burden, said I was taking up space that could go to someone whole. Those people were fools, Warren said flatly, but their foolishness is my gain. If they had kept you, you would not be here with me now. Katherine leaned against his shoulder, and Warren wrapped his arm around her, solid and warm. I never imagined I could be this happy. Neither did I, Warren admitted. I thought I would live and die alone up here. Thought that was enough. Then you stumbled out of that stagecoach, all pride and terror, and everything changed. As September arrived and the aspens began to turn gold, Warren took Katherine higher into the mountains to see the autumn colors. He fashioned a special saddle that allowed her to ride more comfortably, and they spent 3 days camping in the high country, watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of fire. It was there, surrounded by the wild beauty of the mountains, that Warren asked her to marry him. They were sitting beside a crystal-clear lake, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Warren had been quiet all evening, and Katherine had learned to recognize this as a sign that he was working through something important. "Katherine," he said finally, "I know we have not known each other long. 3 months is not much time, but I have spent enough years alone to know what I want. I want you, as my wife, as my partner, as the person I wake up next to for the rest of my life." He pulled something from his pocket, and Katherine saw it was a ring. Not a fancy thing, but beautiful in its simplicity. A band of silver set with a single blue stone that matched the high country lakes. "I made this myself," Warren said, suddenly shy in a way she had never seen him. "The stone is from these mountains. It is not much, but I wanted it to mean something. Wanted you to have a piece of this place that has given us both a home." Katherine felt tears welling up again. "Warren, it is beautiful. Will you marry me?" he asked directly. "Will you be my wife and build a life with me here in these mountains?" "Yes," Katherine said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." When Warren slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. They married in late September in Sloan, with Martha Donovan and her husband standing as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, conducted by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through, but to Katherine, it was more meaningful than any grand church wedding could have been. Martha hugged her fiercely after the ceremony. "I am so happy for you both. I knew Warren needed someone and you needed somewhere to belong. This is right." "I was so scared that day," Katherine admitted. "When I got off the stage, I thought I was at the end of everything." "You were at the beginning," Martha corrected. "Sometimes we have to reach the end of one thing before we can start something new." Warren had purchased supplies for the winter, and they returned to the cabin as man and wife. That night, Warren carried Katherine over the threshold, and she laughed at the traditional gesture. "I can walk, you know," she teased. "I know," Warren said, setting her down gently inside, "but I like carrying you. You are the lightest thing I have ever carried, remember?" Katherine pulled him down for a kiss. "Then carry me to bed, husband." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, Warren showing her with his body what his words had already promised. He was careful with her, mindful of her limitations, but also treated her as a woman fully capable of passion. When Katherine finally fell asleep in his arms, she felt whole in a way she had never experienced before. The winter came early to the high country that year. By mid-October, snow was falling regularly, and Warren made the decision to stay at the cabin rather than make the trip down to sell the furs. "We have everything we need here," he said, pulling Katherine close as they watched the snow fall. "The furs can wait until spring. I would rather spend the winter with my wife than risk the passes freezing before we get back up." Katherine was secretly relieved. The thought of leaving the cabin, of facing the world, and the inevitable whispers about the crippled girl who had trapped a mountain man filled her with dread. Here, in their mountain sanctuary, she could just be Warren's wife, nothing more or less. The winter was long and cold, But inside the cabin, they built a world of warmth and love. Warren taught Katherine to cure hides, to make candles from tallow, to read the weather patterns. Katherine taught Warren to read better, to appreciate poetry, to find joy in small domestic rituals like afternoon tea and evening stories. They talked about the future, about whether they would have children, about growing old together in these mountains. "I worry," Katherine admitted one night as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, "about what kind of mother I would be. What if I cannot keep up with children? What if I pass my weakness on to them?" Warren propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her seriously. "First, you are not weak. Second, any child of ours would be lucky to have you as a mother. You are patient and kind and strong in all the ways that matter. Your ankle does not define you." "But practically, we figure it out," Warren interrupted gently. "The same way we have figured out everything else. Together." Katherine nodded, letting herself believe it. With Warren beside her, anything seemed possible. Spring came late, bursting forth in an explosion of green and wildflowers. Warren prepared the trip down to Sloan to sell the winter's furs, and this time Katherine insisted on going with him. "You do not have to," Warren said. "It is a hard trip, and your ankle—" "My ankle is fine," Katherine said firmly. "Better than it has been in years, actually. The exercise and mountain air have helped. Besides, I am your wife now. Where you go, I go." The trip down was challenging but manageable. Katherine's ankle held up better than she expected, and Warren's careful attention to her comfort made all the difference. When they rode into Sloan, Katherine held her head high, refusing to show any shame or uncertainty. There were whispers, of course. She saw people looking at them, saw the speculation in their eyes, but there were also genuine smiles, particularly from Martha. "Look at you," Martha exclaimed, pulling Katherine into a hug. "You look wonderful. Mountain life agrees with you." Katherine realized it was true. She had gained weight, no longer the gaunt, desperate woman who had stumbled off the stage 10 months earlier. Her skin was tanned and healthy, her eyes bright. She looked like someone who belonged, who was loved. The whispers followed them around town, but Katherine found she did not care as much as she thought she would. One woman in particular, a thin-faced matron named Mrs. Bentley, made a pointed comment as they passed in the street. "It must be convenient," Mrs. Bentley said to her companion, loud enough for Katherine to hear, "to find a man desperate enough to take in a cripple." Before Katherine could respond, Warren stopped walking. He turned to face Mrs. Bentley, and something in his expression made the woman take a step back. "You should be careful," Warren said quietly, "about judging things you do not understand. My wife is worth 10 of most people in this town, and I am the lucky one in our marriage. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me." Mrs. Bentley paled and hurried away. Katherine felt her eyes burn with tears, but they were tears of gratitude rather than shame. "You did not have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," Warren replied, taking her hand. "No one disrespects my wife. They sold the furs for a good price and used the money to purchase supplies and a few luxuries. Warren bought Katherine a proper dress for special occasions and a set of books she had mentioned wanting. Katherine bought Warren new traps and a fine whetstone for his knives. On their last evening in Sloan, they had dinner with Martha and her husband. The older couple listened with evident pleasure as Warren and Katherine talked about their life in the mountains, the plans they were making, the contentment they had found. "You were right," Katherine told Martha. "I thought I was at the end when I got off that stage, but I was really at the beginning." "The best stories always start when we think everything is over," Martha said wisely. "That is when we are finally ready to see what is really possible." They returned to the cabin in early May, and Katherine felt her heart lift as the familiar landscape came into view. This was home now, truly and completely. Summer brought long, golden days and the discovery that Katherine was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited until she was certain before telling Warren. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she took his hand and placed it on her still, flat stomach. "There is someone new coming to the mountain," she said softly. Warren's eyes went wide. "You are sure?" "I am sure." Joy transformed his weathered face, making him look years younger. He pulled Katherine into his arms, holding her as if she were infinitely precious. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked. suddenly uncertain. Happy does not begin to cover it. Warren pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with emotion. You have given me everything, Katherine. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I could not be more blessed if I tried. They spent the summer preparing for the baby. Warren expanded the cabin, adding a small room for the nursery. Katherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. Her ankle gave her more trouble as her pregnancy progressed, but Warren was endlessly patient, helping her with tasks that had become difficult. In late September, as the aspens once again turned gold, Katherine went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Katherine was terrified. But Warren was there throughout, holding her hand, encouraging her, refusing to leave her side. And when their son finally arrived, screaming his fury at being born into the cold mountain air, Katherine felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. He is perfect, Warren said, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his son for the first time. Absolutely perfect. They named him Thomas Warren McAllister, and he was indeed perfect. Dark hair like his father, Katherine's gray eyes, and lungs that suggested he would have no trouble making his presence known. The first months of motherhood were harder than Katherine expected. Her ankle made it difficult to carry the baby for long periods, and there were nights when she cried from sheer exhaustion and frustration. But Warren was there, taking over when she needed rest, never once suggesting that she was inadequate or failing. You are doing beautifully, he told her one night after she had broken down in tears over her inability to walk the baby to sleep. Thomas is fed, clean, and loved. That is what matters. But I cannot do everything a normal mother should do, Katherine said miserably. There is no such thing as a normal mother, Warren replied. There are just mothers who love their children and do their best. You are one of those. Thomas does not care if you limp. He only cares that you are his mother. As Thomas grew, Katherine discovered Warren was right. Her son loved her completely and unconditionally, reaching for her with chubby hands, smiling when she sang to him, falling asleep peacefully in her arms. Her limitations did not matter to him. She was simply Mama, the center of his small world. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who idolized his father and adored his mother. Katherine and Warren added 2 more children to their family. A daughter named Emily, who had her father's blue-gray eyes and quiet strength, and another son named Jacob, who was small and quick and endlessly curious. Katherine's ankle never fully healed, but she learned to work with it rather than against it. She discovered that motherhood was less about chasing after children and more about creating a home where they wanted to be. She baked bread with Emily, taught Thomas his letters, and rocked Jacob to sleep in the chair Warren had built for her. The whispers from town had long since faded. When the McAllister family made their occasional trips to Sloan, people greeted them with genuine warmth. Katherine was no longer the desperate cripple who had stumbled off the stage. She was Warren's wife, the mother of 3 beautiful children, a woman who had built a good life through determination and love. One evening when Thomas was 12, Emily was 8, and Jacob was 5, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was Katherine's favorite time of day, when the work was done and they could simply be together. Mama, Emily asked, were you always happy here? Katherine considered the question. Not always. When I first came here, I was very scared and very sad, but your father helped me learn to be happy. Papa is good at that, Jacob said confidently. Leaning against Warren's leg, Warren ruffled his youngest son's hair. Your mother did the hard part. She chose to be brave even when she was afraid. How did you know you loved each other? Thomas asked, at the age where such questions were beginning to interest him. Katherine and Warren exchanged a look, so much communication flowing between them that no words were needed. I knew when he told me I was not a burden, Katherine said softly. When he showed me that being broken did not make me less valuable. You were never broken, Warren corrected gently. Just hurt. There is a difference. Emily snuggled closer to Katherine. I am glad you came here, Mama. Otherwise we would not exist. I am glad too, Katherine said, her throat tight with emotion. This is where I was always meant to be. As the children eventually wandered off to bed, Katherine remained on the porch with Warren, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest. Do you ever regret it, she asked quietly, taking a chance on me that day in the store? Never. Warren's answer was immediate and firm. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though I cannot keep up with you on the trap lines. Even though I need help with things other women could do easily. Warren turned her to face him, his expression intense in the fading light. Do you remember what I told you that first night? You are the lightest thing I have ever carried. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Your love, your presence, your very existence in my life is not a burden. It is a gift I thank God for every single day. Katherine kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. I love you, Warren McAllister, and I love you, Katherine McAllister, now and always. They sat together as the stars emerged, holding each other in the comfortable silence of a love that had been tested and proven true. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to the family that had been forged in their shadow. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a young man much like his father, strong and quiet and deeply attuned to the rhythms of the wilderness. He decided to stay in the mountains, building his own cabin a few miles from his parents' home and eventually marrying a girl from Sloan named Sarah who was practical and kind. Emily proved to have a gift for healing, learning everything she could about herbs and medicine from her mother and from books Warren ordered from back east. She eventually became the closest thing Sloan had to a doctor, making the trip down from the mountains several times a month to tend to the sick and injured. Jacob, the youngest, had his mother's restless spirit and eventually left to see the world beyond the mountains. But he always returned, bringing stories and gifts, never staying away for more than a few months before the pull of home became too strong to resist. Katherine and Warren grew old together, their bodies aging but their love remaining constant. Katherine's hair turned silver, and Warren's beard grew long and white, but they still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sunset and counting their blessings. One summer evening, when Katherine was 65 and Warren was 73, they sat together as they had 1,000 times before. Their children and grandchildren were visiting, filling the cabin and the meadow with noise and laughter. "Look what we built," Katherine said softly, watching Thomas teach his son to whittle while Emily tended a scraped knee and Jacob told stories that made everyone laugh. "Look what you built," Warren corrected. "You are the heart of this family, Katherine. Everything good comes from you." "We built it together," Katherine insisted. "I could not have done any of this without you. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me a family and a life beyond anything I could have imagined." Warren took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "You gave me all of that and more. You turned a lonely cabin into a home full of love. You gave me children and grandchildren and a legacy that will outlast us both. And you did it all while dealing with pain that would have broken most people." "I am not broken," Katherine said, echoing words he had spoken to her so many years ago. "Just hurt. There is a difference." Warren smiled, that rare full smile that still made her heart skip. "There is indeed." As the sun set and the evening grew cool, their family gathered close. Thomas brought blankets for his parents, Emily brought hot tea, and Jacob started a fire in the stone ring they had built years ago for just such gatherings. Someone suggested songs, and voices rose in harmony, filling the mountain air with music. Katherine leaned against Warren, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, and felt peace settle over her like a benediction. She thought about the terrified, desperate woman who had tumbled off the stagecoach in Sloan so many years ago. That woman had been convinced she was a burden, convinced she had nothing to offer, convinced she would die alone and unmourned. But that woman had been wrong. She had not been a burden. She had been the beginning of something beautiful. She had been the seed from which this entire family had grown. She had been loved, cherished, and valued every single day of her life with Warren. "Thank you," she whispered to Warren so softly that only he could hear. "For what?" he asked, equally quiet. "For seeing me when I could not see myself, for believing I was worth carrying." Warren kissed the top of her head. "You were never a weight to be carried. You were a treasure to be cherished. And I would choose you again every single time." Around them, their family laughed and sang and lived the life that Katherine and Warren had built together. And as the stars emerged in the vast mountain sky, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. Years later, when both Katherine and Warren had passed on peacefully within months of each other, their children gathered to remember them. They told stories of their parents' devotion, of the way Warren had looked at Katherine as if she were the most precious thing in the world, of the way Katherine had created a home filled with love despite the pain she carried. Emily, sorting through her mother's things, found a journal Katherine had kept. In it, written in her mother's careful hand, were these words: "I came to these mountains broken and afraid, convinced I was a burden no one would want to carry. But Warren showed me the truth. Love is not about carrying burdens. It is about choosing to walk beside someone, sharing the load, making the journey together. He told me I was the lightest thing he ever carried, but the truth is we carried each other. Through pain and joy, through struggles and triumphs, we carried each other home. And in the end, that made all the difference." Thomas had the words carved onto their shared headstone in the small cemetery near the cabin. Below it, he added one line of his own: "Together they built a legacy of love that will endure as long as these mountains stand." And so it did. The cabin still stands in that high mountain meadow, maintained now by Thomas's grandson, who brings his own children there to teach them about the great-great-grandparents who proved that love could flourish in even the harshest places. The story of Katherine and Warren has become family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that being broken does not mean being worthless, and that true love sees beyond limitations to the precious soul within. On summer evenings, when the wind whispers through the pines and the sunset paints the peaks gold and crimson, some say you can still feel their presence there, not as ghosts, but as the living legacy of a love that refused to be diminished by circumstance or convention. A love that said you are not a burden but a blessing. A love that said you are not too much but exactly enough. A love that said I will carry you and you will carry me, and together we will build something that outlasts us both. And in the end, that is exactly what they did.